Very good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to the CHS Open House. We are now in the Understanding Social Complexity panel session. We have just gone on live stream, so welcome to everybody. We'd like to invite Dr. Nina Powell, who is our moderator. Over to you, Dr. Nina.
Thanks so much, Nisar. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Nina Powell, and I'm a senior lecturer in psychology. I'll say a little bit more about myself in just a minute, but first, let me just say welcome and thanks to the panelists who are joining me. We have representation from social work, economics, and the Department of Sociology and Anthropology today. So basically what's going to happen now is we're just going to first do a brief introduction of who we are. I'll go last, so I'll just call on my colleagues one at a time. And then I have a few questions that I'm going to ask our panel. And then from that point, we'll turn it over to Q&A. You can type your questions in the Q&A window, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. Just one thing to note, that we're not focusing so much on technical questions. We're here as the academics who want to answer your questions more broadly about our subject matter or the modules that we teach, different sorts of things you might want to know about the social sciences that we'll try to speak on. Not so much about the technical matters of admission and requirements and so on. Most of that information can actually be found on our website. Okay, so without further ado, let's just do a little introduction. So could I ask first Dr. Alex from social work to just say a little bit about who you are and your area of research and teaching?
Hello, hi. Thank you, Nina, and welcome everyone to this panel. My name is Alex Lee, and I'm a social work lecturer. When I see this panel, I feel very connected to everyone here, Nina, Indira, and Georgiou. And Nina being from psychology, Indira from sociology, and Georgiou from economics. And the reason why I say I feel very connected is because in my undergrad years, I took sociology as my second major. So I doubled major in social work and sociology. But before that, I wanted to do psychology because I wanted to become a clinical psychologist. But lo and behold, I became a social worker, and I've been teaching at the department since that. But why am I connected to Georgiou also from the economics? Because before coming into social work, I didn't want to be involved with making money. It's like, making money is something not in my cup of tea. Then I realized that in social work, we do a lot of spending money. So I'm not involved in making money, but I'm teaching students how to spend money for the good of society. So that's who I am. I like to spend other people's money, and I'm very interested in the welfare and the benefit of society. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Alex. That's great. Interesting background. I'm just going to ask now a quick introduction on research and teaching from Dr. Georgios.
Hi to all. Unlike Alex, I don't feel very connected because I used to be a lawyer. So, actually, we take money. We take money from other people. That's why we are in the last floor of hell. So then I switched to economics, and my research field is what is known as applied econometrics or applied microeconomics, which means that we're trying to find relationships between variables. Something like, okay, if I go to class, will I get a higher score on the final? Things like that. We study things like that all the time, and we try to find what is known as causal relationships between these variables, like does going to class cause a higher grade on the final? And this was actually this year's Nobel Prize. It was awarded on people who worked on the issue of causality. So yeah, that's what I do. Thanks, Nina.
Thanks so much, Georgios. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Indira.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you all for coming. I am an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology, but surprisingly, I don't teach sociology because we are now becoming a combined department of anthropology and sociology. We've always had anthropologists, but now we have a new major, and we are very happy to acknowledge that. So I'm an anthropologist, and I study. I mean, anthropology, generically means the study of humans, but everyone here studies humans, right? It's not so. Unique or anything, but the uniqueness of this comes from doing fieldwork, extended fieldwork for 18 months, 20 months, however long it is, to have a holistic sense of how people fit economics, psychology, ethics, whatever, all of this into their lives as they live in the everyday. So I work largely on religion, as well as you all know, this is very important nowadays, especially, and politics. And I teach religion, kinship relations, as well as making sense of violence. Not how to do violence, but how to understand violence that is all around us. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Indira. I will just say quickly a little bit about who I am. So I mentioned I'm in psychology, senior lecturer here for about the past 10 years, and I broadly do research on moral judgment in children, infants, young children, adults, and broadly very interested in consciousness, cognitive development. So those are the sorts of areas I like to look at different questions in. So currently working on understanding the ethics of smart cities, artificial intelligence, and how humans work within a smart city framework. Okay, so I won't say too much more now about any of that because I have some, I think, interesting questions to ask our panelists. In fact, I'm seeing that some of the questions we're getting in the Q&A will speak directly to some of our questions. So let me start with this question. What is something about your discipline or area of research that really excites you, puzzles you, kind of, I like to say to my students sometimes, like keeps you up at night? So if I could ask maybe to start with, if Dr. Indira would say a little bit.
Thank you. Everything keeps me up awake at night. I can't sleep because so many things are happening. So many things are happening at the same time. But specifically with my discipline, right? We are in the business of culture, right? Trying to describe how people make sense of their everyday lives, live, socialize, love, labor, all of that, right? And how they make the choices that they do. The thing is, when I do field work, I'm actually incorporating other people's stories and words and anecdotes and thoughts and theories into my own work. And I'm trying to make sense of all of this. So the thing that keeps me up at night is whether I'm doing this well enough to sort of represent them well enough and their concerns well enough. And who am I to do it? Why do I get to do it? Why do I have the privilege to do it? I mean, what gives me the right to do so? So all of these sort of ethical questions surrounding my research makes me worry, like whether I'm doing justice to this complexity that people live in. The thing that excites me about my discipline, and that's always excited me about my discipline, is like I wanted to be an anthropologist since I was 18 years old. So when I went for my first anthropology class, and this is it, right? This is what I want to do. Before that, I was a literature major, and I thought I was going to continue with that, but then I switched to anthropology. And the thing that I loved about it is how huge, beautiful, and still amazing and miraculous the whole universe is. Right? We think we have all the answers, especially in Singapore. We are all like navel gazers, like, oh, Singapore does this, Singapore does that. And I look at other people's thoughts about how to live their lives, be it in some city in America or some along the river Amazon or some small place in Melanesia, all over the world, and how people have come up with solutions to common problems. And that sort of multiplicity of ideas and pluralistic ways of living with the world excites me. I'd like to know more, and I like to listen to stories. So anyone who tells me a story is like, great. I mean, this allows me to do that, so that's why I like it.
That's great. Thanks so much. Maybe I could ask the same question to Dr. Alex.
Okay, thanks, Nina. One of the things that keeps me up at night is to try to understand why people behave the way they are. So quite similar to psychology and maybe to anthropology. But my focus is on the area of counseling. And in the area of counseling, we encounter many people who seem to be having difficulties and challenges. And the question, and when we look at them, we see that, hey, actually, if you change a little bit this part of your life, maybe that will help a lot. But they seem to not want to change, or they seem to have some difficulty making those changes. And so maybe making a change could be quite scary. There's some things about that change that might be scary to them. So my area of thinking is how to develop a counseling model, develop counseling ways of looking and interacting at people to see how we can help them along the way in their journey of change, and change in a way that is comfortable for them and helpful for them. I've been involved in helping SAGE Counseling Center to develop a counseling model for older people. And now I can see a lot of my students and myself, we are thinking about how can we engage this new generation of youth and young people in counseling and in interacting with them. So one module I'm teaching is family-centered practice, which is something like family therapy, and to look at not just counseling individuals, but looking at the family as a whole, every individual in the family coming together, contributing to the solution or some change. So these are some things that keeps me up at night. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. And finally, maybe I can hear a little bit on this from Dr. Georgios.
Okay, hi again. So maybe I can frame this within the concept of what economics is. So you can, if we look at the word economics, it has two parts, right? Eco means house, okay? Like ecology, ecosystem, things like that. And the other part of the word means distribute. So economics means how to distribute things in a house. All right. So then the question becomes, distribute what really? And the answer is typically resources. We want to decide how to distribute resources. So how are we going to distribute resources in nature? And in nature, usually what's being done is we use, well, animals use the law of the jungle, right? And in the law of the jungle, what is being used is force. Force, the animals use force to acquire resources. Now, humans typically this is not their key feature, right? Force. Animals are way better at using force than humans. Humans are better with other things like intelligence. So even though, like we've seen in the past 4 days, sometimes occasionally force is being used, humans have developed another way, another institution, if you will, to exchange resources and distribute resources in their house. And this other institution uses what is the key characteristic? Intelligence, the key characteristic of humans. And we call this institution the market. So in the market, what is being distributed in the market? Everything is being distributed in the market. Goods, services, stocks, bonds, anything you can think of is distributed in a market. So by studying economics, what we are trying to achieve is to learn how markets work and how markets allow us to exchange resources. So to Nina's question, what used to keep me up at night, before I started studying economics, I was always wondering, how do things acquire value? Like, why is this like 30 cents and this $30? I was wondering why is that? What gives value to things? It turns out that there is no good answer to this. People have tried to give a good answer, 200 years ago, economists have tried to find an actual and objective reason that gives value to things, but we don't believe this anymore. Like Karl Marx, for example, thought that the value is related to the amount of time that it takes to create something. but he was wrong. We don't believe that anymore. And in reality, right now, we believe that there is no objective way to measure a thing's value. It's all based on what they will teach you in the first lecture in economics, supply and demand. So very abstract and subjective things. So basically, to my question, I never found a good answer. I never found a good answer. I'm still in the field, though. I'm not getting discouraged.
Okay, great. Well, I'll just say a little bit about from my perspective as a psychologist. So I'm pretty curious about where morality comes from, whether there is an objective right or wrong that exists sort of universally across time and space, culture, right? And how we construct morality and norms and practices through reasoning. So a lot of my questions about morality come back down to questions about human beings' capacity for reason, our capacity for thinking, for creating the world that we think has right and wrong within it. And with a lot of that being challenged currently, the idea that human beings can reason, I'm particularly interested in sort of challenging that idea. Well, I guess, so I'm interested in understanding when and how we can reason, even if there is some question at the moment in the field about whether we actually do reason our way to our thoughts about right and wrong. So that keeps me up at night. Okay, so this next question for my fellow panelists is definitely being asked in the chat, the Q&A rather. Just a reminder, if you have a question, do use the Q&A rather than the chat. We just had one question that was accidentally dismissed. So I think we have a colleague in the room who's been kind enough to address the question. But nonetheless, if you have other questions, just use the Q&A. So the next question I want to ask our panelists is, what's a major misconception about your discipline or your area of research? Or even if you want to think about it from the perspective of sort of assumptions that students might make on entering your discipline or your modules, what is a common misconception that you see? So maybe I'll start by asking Dr. Alex.
Thanks. I think this misconception about social work is that many people think, including parents, think that majoring in social work means that you do a lot of volunteer work, and that this is a module or major about how to do volunteering work. And so I think that would be a misconception. I think social work is a professional work. So instead of talking about how to volunteer, there's actually a lot of discipline and thought about how to make changes in the world and how we can improve systems so that people's lives can be better. We talk a lot about social justice, and we talk about very practical support and help. And so it's one step further than volunteering. It is actually a very intentional helping. And this actually is quite tough, quite difficult. So social workers are actually paid, and and we get a professional, salary. And this salary, I think, is quite similar to the market. So we are very competitive. In fact, many social workers or many other FASS graduates are surprised when they hear about the salaries that social workers get. So it's a professional work, and probably the only professional department in the faculty. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Alex. That's really helpful, actually, because I do think it's a big difference between social work and psychology, for example, which a lot of students ask about, is that we're not a professional degree. So we don't sort of accredit psychologists that graduate and leave as practicing psychologists in the same way that social work does. So that's a useful point. Can I ask maybe Indira to say a little bit about common misconceptions?
Yes, sure. There are two misconceptions. The first one has receded quite a bit, but I'll just like to bring it up, right? So my mother doesn't understand what I do. So she tries to explain, and then she says anthropologist, and then people hear entomologists, and you work with insects. You know, that's not true. I don't work with insects. But the other thing was that people used to think anthropologists just work with tribal people or people marginalized in sort of primitive conditions and things like that, right? And this may have been true in the beginning of the discipline, precisely because these were people nobody was interested in. Most of the studies were focused on metropolises or urban centers or large kind of powerful countries, things like that. And so these people who are on the forefront of climate change or political change or colonialism and all of that, people were not looking at very effectively. And anthropologists were one of the few disciplines that actually went out and sourced the perspectives of these people who lived on the margins. But nowadays, that's no longer true. Anthropologists study everything from a Japanese manufacturing plant to Wall Street to people living in New York, too. Still people going out and looking at people who live in forests in Malaysia, or as I have done. I went back to my native village in India to do the research. I was born there, but I left when I was 2 years old, and I've been in Singapore ever since then. But so I went back to this village and found out where I come from, right? And what are the structures involved there. So you can study a wide array of things. It's not restricted to that. The second thing is that people sort of, I mean, especially our students in NUS are very taken with objectivity and taken with numbers, right? And so in one of my classes, which is kinship, right, I asked them to go and work on their own family genealogy, right, from their ancestors to today, and the choices they make in terms of migration, in terms of gender, in terms of all of this. And they're like, I mean, I'm just going to interview my grandmother. I mean, who will believe her? Like, will it have any analytical resonance? Will it be truthful? I mean, what if she lies, right? So this, one of the things why I deliberately make them do this is to see that even one case study, even your own family is valuable, right? There's a saying that says that every time an older person dies, an entire library dies, right? So this is one of the things that humans are repositories of knowledge, and looking at objectivity and numbers and generalizability and all of that kind of stuff misses a very important part of how we understand the world, how we live in the world, right? So even one person is enough. It's all about how people create meaning, how people sustain themselves, and how people socialize other people into these meanings, right? So those are the two things that I'd like to highlight. Yeah.
Excellent. That's really interesting. Thanks for that. And Dr. Georgios, you want to say a little bit about some misconceptions in your discipline?
Yeah, so I would like to talk about two things, one more practical and one more theoretical. Let's start with the practical. My understanding from Singapore's educational system is that economics is being taught in what is called the junior college, and from what I understand is that there, economics is taught in a way that is not quantitative. So the answers are sort of essays and sort of qualitative. So here at the university level, what's happening is that this might be a surprise to people who liked economics before. And there is a sort of mentality shift, because at the university level, what's happening is that economics becomes more mathy. Even from the introductory courses, economics is characterized by being quite quantitative. So now here comes the problem. The problem is that if you like economics and you thought that it is like writing essays, and then you go to college, to university, and you see that, oh, now it's all mathy, then there might be a misalignment between the expectations and the reality. So one needs to be cognizant of this, of the fact that economics in reality does require some sophistication with respect to quantitative methods, meaning math and statistics. Now, and some of you, so for those of you who really like math, super, like you're going to have a breeze, because obviously the math that economics requires is not at the level that you would encounter in a math department, right? So yeah, you're going to like economics at the university level. Now, for those of you who like the other stuff, the more the social aspect of economics, is this a deal breaker? I don't know. You have to think about it yourselves. I'm telling you that economics requires math, but it's not only math, right? There's so many other aspects that I assume would satisfy your curiosities. But if I think for a person who is absolutely sure that math is not their thing, probably you wouldn't enjoy economics. And you know, we might die tomorrow. Why do something that you're not going to enjoy over 4 years? It might not be a good idea. So these are things. If you're iffy, then it's okay. It might be doable. But if you're sure that math is not your thing, then maybe you should consider joining another, maybe one of the fields of my esteemed colleagues here. I think they're not as mathy as economics is. So another thing that a theoretical misconception that I would like to talk about is that economics is usually associated with selfishness. That, oh, if I am studying economics, I am thinking of people always making selfish decisions. And this is not true. Selfishness is indeed at the core of the economic way of thinking, but it is not the only way of thinking. There are other ways of thinking that can be accommodated by the discipline of economics. And indeed, in the last 2 or 3 decades, economists have expanded the scope of the field to fields like altruism, for example, or inequality. So it's not true that economists are only focused on selfish decisions. Other type of decisions can also be studied through the lens of economists. And if this, for example, and if this is what your thing is, then there is definitely scope for probing these other domains. Thank you, Nina.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Yeah, that was really useful. I'm also going to do a similar kind of thing in separating a couple of the misconceptions in practical, theoretical, so to speak. So in psychology, I would say kind of maybe opposite to economics, maybe, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have a lot of math. And there's a tendency to think that we don't. So statistics is a big part of a psychology degree. It's not to say that it's everything, but it is, I think, surprising just to many students, more important than you may have otherwise considered. And more than just maths or statistics, so to speak, the biological side of psychology, the brain, our senses, our ability to perceive things in our environment, all of that, including, you know, a strong understanding of genetics and ontogeny and development, has a component to it that I think may surprise many students if you're not aware of the fact that we're, as psychology, let's say as psychology academics, not exclusively focused on topics around mental health. In fact, that's only one part of psychology. And additionally, that we're not exclusively focused on social psychology, which is maybe what students are maybe more familiar with. There's a lot of other parts of psychology that I think are really interesting and important, but may surprise students. Things like vision, understanding the eye, like I said, the brain, understanding how the organism develops from fetus to an infant and so on. So that's one thing I want to say. And then the next thing I want to say is that, more theoretical, I suppose, is that students tend to think that we have the answers. And we don't have the answers. And I'm the module coordinator currently for HSS 1000, which is the Understanding Social Complexity core or common curriculum module on the social sciences. And the theme of our module broadly is uncertainty. And the reason for that is because we really want to emphasize that even as scientists, as social scientists, using experimental methods as we do in psychology, using physiological methods like we do in psychology, looking at the brain, right, looking at physiological changes in the body, we still don't have objective answers to many of our big questions about human experience, the development and origin of certain, human tendencies like morality, for example. So we are dealing with lots of uncertainty. We're asking a lot of questions. There's a lot of debate. There's a lot of disagreement, but that's what makes it interesting and keeps us around, I think. Otherwise, if we had all the answers, we could just go home. Okay, so I don't think I want to say anything else about that just yet. I see I'm reading the questions as they're coming through in the Q&A, so maybe I'll save a few things to address those questions. Let me ask one more question of our panelists before we move to the Q&A. And I think this is really useful for students. So in your experience over the years, what do you think makes for a successful student? And in other words, also eventually a successful scholar in your specific discipline. So maybe I could first just go to Georgios.
Yeah, okay. My answer to that is related to what I said before. So a successful student in economics is probably someone who is comfortable with math. They will be comfortable. They will be in their domain. There will be in a familiar environment. And the reverse, like I said before, someone who is not comfortable with math will not enjoy much these 4 years. Of course, like I said before, you can try and you will probably pass, but it will not be enjoyable. Another thing is, okay, is there a need for hard work? I think yes. So it's important to realize that these things require some time to study and all this. Of course, this does not mean that university is a one-dimensional experience and it's only studying, right? It's just one part, but some studying needs to be done. So obviously, I think this is a no-brainer. You understand that when you go to university, some degree of sacrifice is required. But at the same time, you need to remember that there needs to be a limit to that. So yeah, I think overall, these are the attributes. Remember that okay, if you're not comfortable with math, it's going to be problematic. You need to want to study, to read new things, learn new things, be curious, follow the news. The news is usually a good way to think. Are you interested right now in what happened to the ruble, for example? If you're interested in this kind of what happened to the natural gas prices in the last 4 days, are you interested? If you're interested in this kind of things, you would be interested in the field of economics. If you're not, then you probably better off doing something else.
Thanks so much. Okay, fantastic. Dr. Alex?
For social work, a little bit different from economics. Not that much of mathematics involved, but I think to be a successful social work students, we need to be very curious and to know that there's no one answer. So 1 + 1 doesn't always equal to 2 in social work. And we want to be open to different interpretations, different perspectives. And so a student who is able to tolerate possible answers would do well, and to be able to articulate why you might want to take a certain perspective versus another perspective, who would be able to see things from different perspective, that would be very helpful. And the major reason is because we're dealing with social problems and societal issues, and there's no one way to explain why things are happening in that way. So if a social work student is able to see things from very diverse perspective, that would be very helpful. And I think I want to link this to some of the questions, whether social work and sociology, social work and psychology, or even if social work and economics, are these good combinations? I think yes, because in social work, we're dealing with such a wide range of issues that if you have different kind of backgrounds and discipline coming in, even if you take on a science kind of background coming in, that is helpful for us to understand why some of the things are happening the way they are. And for us to then have a way to think, to be able to bring in all the different disciplines is very helpful. Yeah.
Thanks, that's great. I'm noticing a common theme. I'm going to touch on it in a minute. Dr. Indira?
Hi, yeah, so like Nina, I'm also noticing a common theme, right? So I would say there are 3 things that are necessary to be a good sociology or an anthropology student. Number 1, as everyone has said, intellectual curiosity, right? You must want to know the answers to things, right? Why do these things happen? What is happening in the world, right? If you are just cocooned in your own little bubble without caring about the world or whatever, then this is going to be difficult for you. So first, be curious about the things around you. Secondly, you would need some bravery, I would argue, because as like with social work, we don't have the answers. We try to ask the questions to come up with the answers, but we don't have the answers. A lot of time there's tremendous uncertainty. Sometimes there's tremendous, multiple answers. So you cannot be sure of yourself in many ways, or sure of the answers in many ways, and to be juggling uncertainty, right? So in one of my classes on religion, I teach about theories of causation, and one of the answers to this is witchcraft, right? So they have empirical kind of reasons for why something collapses, a building collapses or whatever, right? But they also think, oh, it can't be just explained by an empirical thing. Why did it happen now at right this minute? It could have happened yesterday when no one was in the building, right? So it doesn't fully satisfy them, right? And then they argue if someone is, after me and they put a spell on me. So it's not just about empirical logic, it's also emotional logic. It has to satisfy emotionally as well. And this will include religion and things like that. And the last thing that I would say that is very important as well is humility. Do not think you have all the answers, right? The answers, you might think you are the most developed country in the world with the best solutions to this. And Singaporeans are very prone to this. Oh, we are the best this and the best that and the best whatever, right? What you need to be an anthropologist is humility. You don't have all the answers. Other people may have better ways of organizing their lives, better ways of living. And our duty is to learn from this. So it's a sort of utopic sense at the heart of anthropology, right? A tremendous dissatisfaction with what we are familiar with, and looking for other better answers, but also seeing that other people may have solutions that we can learn from. The key is learning from others. That's the important thing. Yeah.
Thanks so much. That's great. I'm very encouraged by our advice. I think it's really streamlining across some main themes. So I'm going to just say a little bit more, I think, consolidating everything you've all said, which is definitely successful students are curious, the intellectual curiosity. More than that, I want to say, I think students need to be very comfortable taking risks. And I know that that's not something that comes easy for many of our students. And I work a lot with our students trying to encourage them to take risks, not always just go for the safe option, both in terms of thinking and in terms of studying, that it's really a lot better to reach for more questions, undermine your own assumptions, undermine your own sense of closure and certainty, because that's how you find nuance. That's how you reject dogma, and you try your best to sort of, look further beyond what is obvious, because what is obvious and straightforward may not always be very useful or accurate. I think one last thing I want to emphasize for psychology students is that you must read. You must read. I say to students that probably the most important thing you do in university is read. So I would say that if you don't like to read, that's not a good sign. It can be overcome at any point though. So, try to get stuck in with reading, think, be curious. And specifically for psychology, it's good not to have any hatred of biology or philosophy. So if you have a strong objection to biology, it's not great. There's a lot of biology in psychology. If you have a really strong objection to philosophy, also not great. Psychology is the marrying of biology and philosophy. That's how our discipline came to be. Okay, so rather than take any more or ask any more questions for my panelists, maybe what I can do now is just start to go through the Q&A. We've been answering some of the questions as they come. Some of the questions have been folded into our other responses to the questions I've been asking. So let's just have a look. Maybe I can just pick a few and ask our panelists. Maybe could I ask Dr. Indira to say a little bit about the difference between sociology and anthropology, maybe?
Yeah, this is a very common question. And the reason we are in the same department is obviously because they are linked, right? So, the difference is not as clear-cut or as solid and concrete as you would expect, right? There are differences in theoretical orientations. The body of theories are different, right? And who we evoke and who we talk about as the foremothers and forefathers is different. The methodologies may be slightly different as well. So intensive field work, going out and immersing yourself in the field, although problematized by the COVID situation, is still the main methodology through which you gather, through which you generate data. So direct interviews, participant observation, all of that. So the methodology is probably, the emphasis on this form of methodology is probably the most striking difference. And also the anthropology encourages cross-cultural comparison. At the heart of anthropology is comparing the case study that you're working with other case studies from other countries, other societies, other times, other geographies, all of that, right? And lastly, a holistic sense of it, right? Anthropology, as I said, means the study of humans, right? At the heart of anthropology is always the sense of the person. You may talk, like for my research, for example, I talk about the cosmos a lot. I talk about astrology, right? And I talk about the influence or what my informants think about the influence of the stars on human lives. But you can connect these broad categories of structure and individuals, even the cosmos and individuals. But right at the heart of it is always the person, right? The person's story, the person's experience, their everyday experience as well. It's always highlighted in that.
Thanks so much. That's really interesting. I would just like to say a little bit about some of the questions I'm seeing for psychology. One thing I'm noticing, common sort of different forms of the same kind of question. It's very important. This goes back to misconceptions. Psychology is not a specialization degree. You don't leave our undergraduate program a clinical psychologist or a forensic psychologist or any of that. It's a generic psychology degree, and you don't leave the degree a professional psychologist. To do that, you have to go on to graduate school. You have to go to a master's program, PhD program. And so any of your questions, I think, about, can I study forensic psychology, or can I study clinical psychology, or will I be disadvantaged if I don't know clinical psychology, don't really apply to the undergraduate curriculum. All right, there's a range of different modules that we offer, especially as you get to the final year, and you take the honors modules that cover the faculty members' discipline, specific sort of area of expertise. But it's not a specialization degree. And lastly, if you want to know what kinds of modules we might offer, not only do you need to look at the list of modules on the department website, but if you go to the faculty website, and I think this applies for everyone as well, right? For my panelists, if you go to the faculty websites for our disciplines, you will see what research areas we have, right, in our department. And of course, now the curriculum is largely going to map on to the faculty's research areas. So if you have a look at the different people in the department and you see what they're working on, what they're up to, you'll get a sense for the kinds of emphases we have in our curriculum. So for instance, we don't have any forensic psychologists at the moment in our department, and therefore you wouldn't expect a lot of forensic modules or offerings. Not to say you can't go on to pursue that, but it would have to be postgraduate studies. Okay, let me just take a look and see if there's some other questions we can answer. Let's see.
As you're looking at that, maybe I can add a little bit to what you mentioned. Yeah. So I like what Nina mentioned, and I believe that psychology training actually exposes a lot of students about the wide areas, so many areas in psychology. And just now I mentioned that I wanted to become a clinical psychologist, but decided not to and do social work instead. And one of the reasons is I discovered that it takes such a long journey to become a clinical psychologist, to do a PhD as well. And I found a shortcut in social work. After getting my training in social work, I could straight away go to do people helping. But lo and behold, I eventually did a PhD too. So I did spend that long time in academia too. So back to you, Nina. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I think that's really useful. Maybe I can just kind of summarize a lot of the questions we're getting for all of our respective disciplines to maybe if we could each say a little bit about career prospects. So I'm seeing that kind of coming up. I'll start by just saying for psychology, just to reiterate here that it's a generic psychology degree covering a lot of areas of psychology. So career prospects are very broad. You can basically go into almost any kind of career you want, really, with a psychology background. That ranges from work in ministries, common area we see our students, our graduates go into, whether it's working for the police or prison services or working for MOE or NIE. Of course, if you want to go into clinical side of things, you might end up having to pursue, graduate studies if you want to practice as a clinical psychologist. But with a bachelor's degree, you can really go into anything from HR to education. Lots of students end up in education context, to data science, really cool, exciting, burgeoning area, and further into maybe sort of government, public sector work with ministries and so on. It's a very broad-based career prospect for psychology. How about maybe Georgios, you could say a little bit about economics?
Yeah, with economics, you go typically to jobs like in a bank, in a financial institution, a consultant in a private firm. Financial institutions are typically the domain where many economists find jobs. Of course, you can also work for in areas of policy making, either in the public or the private sector. One thing that is important, and Nina just mentioned it, is that in this new world we live in, where we use these things all the time, data are generated every second, right? Every millisecond. So it's important for an economist, in fact, for anyone right now, but I'm representing economics here. So it's important to get the skills to analyze the data, these data skills like big data. It's a skill that the degree here will offer to you if you so wish. So there are courses that will allow you to learn how to use the necessary software to analyze the data, and this is very useful in the open market. This makes you very marketable. I can't stress this enough. Very, very important, very important thing. Thank you, Nina.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. And Indira, do you want to say a little bit about career prospects?
Yeah, thank you, Nina. So like all the other panelists, I also want to emphasize that this is a general degree, right? Which means it's open. It's not so much an informational, dump as it is learning how to generate data, how to analyze data, what kind of fieldwork you have to do, what kind of questions you should ask. So just as quantitative data is very useful in terms of making policies and all that, qualitative data is something that a lot of government sectors, public policy, all of these people are looking for. As I said, the center is the human person at the center of. So even if you look at technology, it's still, we're talking about humans, how they use technology. So there's a lot of user experience research that's coming up, that's in Grab or whatever, that's asking for anthropologists specifically to look at how humans employ and are socialized into technology. So the interface between technology and humanity is a huge area to exploit for this. You can, and the second thing that we work with is culture, right? So learning about culture, different histories, how people get along with each other. This is very important, especially in the multicultural, globalized world that we live in. This culture is our business, right? So explaining culture, explaining practices to people through journalism, for government policies, through teaching, all of this is very important as well. And you learn how to write essays and how to interpret data. And this is useful across a wide range of disciplines, right? A wide range of careers. The thing I want to emphasize is that you learn skills that you can apply in many fields. It's not restricted to, you have to be an anthropologist, you have to be a sociologist or something. And in this globalized world, in this ever-changing world, you cannot study for a job anymore. You have to learn the skills and apply them in whatever jobs you have to be. So thinking on your feet during fieldwork situations is something that we train you to do. What sort of decisions must you make, right? What sort of decisions ensures great data? How do you analyze this data? So I would emphasize methodologies and skills rather than information as being the highlight of what prepares you for a wide range of careers through anthropology.
Great, that's really interesting. Thank you for that. I've been looking through the questions, and I'm trying to answer some of them as well. I know some of my panelists are also giving some answers. So I think rather than, we only have a few minutes left, rather than, I don't see any questions necessarily that we haven't touched on that can't be answered maybe with a quick reply, if my panelists want to just have a quick scan through and see if there's any you can reply to. But more than that, I think to close, I just wanted to ask our panelists, what are you currently reading or learning about that our students, if they want to, our prospective students, if they want to join you in getting a head start? I've had some students ask for reading lists, and I give out my email address and tell them, if you want a reading list, just email me, I'll happily give it to you. But what are you currently reading or learning about that you could share with students who might want to get a head start thinking about their different subject matters? Maybe I'll start with Alex.
Right, maybe what I'm reading and learning about may not be suitable to come in. I'm actually learning about technology and how social work and social services can employ technology. But I think this is probably maybe in the second or third year, then we may do that. In fact, I started a module about how social work can employ technology in human services. And this is, I think, is quite an important development in the field. But to prepare yourself coming in, I think would be to have a good idea of social issues. If you read the newspaper and trying to think a little bit about different perspectives and social issues, I think that would be very helpful. Yeah.
Great, thanks for that. Georgios?
In the last few years, I've been reading books on what is called behavioral economics, which is a blend between psychology and economics. And 2 Nobel Prizes have been awarded in the last 20 years in this field, one of which was to a psychologist, not to an economist. I've been reading books on this. Some titles are Fast and Slow, Misbehaving, Nudge. A recent one is called Noise. I'm also interested in more fundamental things that are not related to economics, because grass is always greener on the other side. So a book that I recommend is called Until the End of Time by Brian Greene, if you're interested in the physics of the end of the universe. Thank you.
Very cool. Okay. And Indira?
Currently, I'm trying to think beyond the human, right? So most of our disciplines are centered on human perspectives, human knowledge, human understandings, right? How do you theorize beyond the human? How do you theorize humans as just one other aspect of the universe, right? And the universe is peopled by many things, including plants and animals and rivers and gods and deities and all of that, as well as an anthropology of religion. That's what I look at. So some of the interesting things that I'm looking at are looking at the world from the perspective of stones, for example, or from the perspective of moss, right? What can moss tell us about human culture? And this is something that we totally dismiss, right? We don't see it from how do you see the world from the perspective of the moss, and how it grows, and the history and the environment that it can tell us. So in this era of environmental catastrophe, I think seeing beyond ourselves, seeing how we are connected to the cosmos, seeing how we are just a small tiny part of a infinitely huge universe is something that I've been interested in looking at, and specifically looking at scientific knowledge in terms of culture as well, right? How do you explain climate change in terms of people's perceptions of this? So in my fieldwork, for example, people are saying, the sparrows have disappeared, or the peacocks do not come to the fields anymore. And so these may seem simplistic statements, but they are sort of cultural expressions of tremendous climate trauma, right? And so these are the things that I've been looking at the moment. So the thing that I've got no specific literature to recommend, but I think being able to connect the individual, the private, the human to the structural, to the cosmic is the most important. So creating patterns and connections, I think, is the most important skill to have.
Great, thanks so much. And I'll just say one non-psychology book, but very relevant to psychology and very basically full of psychology. And one of the most important books I think you could ever read is Factfulness, 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World, by Hans Rosling. I really highly recommend everyone reads that book. And then I'm currently reading The Sweet Spot by Paul Bloom, who's a psychologist. It's The Sweet Spot, The Pleasures of Suffering and the Search for Meaning. And I'm planning to do a review of this book, in fact, and I think there's a lot of really interesting things in there that I agree with and many I disagree with. So that's what I'm currently looking at. I think we're really out of time now. I just want to take a second to thank my panelists for joining me and answering these questions and sharing so much about your area, your work, your discipline, and your thoughts on working with students and incoming students in your majors. I'll turn it back over to you, Nisar.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Nina and team. I think the audience just couldn't stop having more. In terms of panel sessions, I sense that this is very pragmatic, and the advice can't get more real than what the 4 of you have shared this evening. So thank you so much for that. For the audience, if there are any other questions that we have not been able to respond to, you can reach out to us. We'll just put up a slide in a second. Meanwhile, we are working on a couple of additional outreach sessions in April and May. So if we could put up our poll and hear your thoughts, that will be very helpful for our planning purposes. Okay, so the poll is up there. There's a very simple 4 questions. If we could ask the audience to help us share your thoughts, that would be very helpful. In the meanwhile, our slide will go up. If you can have any other questions, please drop us a line at askchs@nus.edu.sg. Our phone lines are also available for you in case you might have any questions. And just to let you know that we are on 5th of March, NUS is having our physical open house. Numbers are limited, but we are running FASS master classes, which have very quickly filled up. But not to worry, you can log into our Facebook live stream and experience the sessions from the comfort of your home. We have about 8 to 10 panel sessions, masterclass sessions running back to back. So please do join us. The phone number to reach out to us is 6516-6133. And our social media handles are below. Do follow us and keep up to date with what's happening. Our panelists are available. We've put up our e-brochures on our website, and you can reach out specifically to our departments as well as our panelists who are listed on our website. So thank you so much, everybody. We've had a very long, fruitful day, and we hope the audience enjoyed the sessions and benefited from the program. Please feel free to reach out to us. We look forward to welcoming you to CHS at NUS. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, panelists.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.